Intention to understand the human needs. In the last clip, I shared about our tendency to judge as the root to many conflicts we experience in our daily lives. For the next several lessons, I'd like to bring our focus to how we might work with our judgments and shift our way that helps to bring connections rather than divisions between people. This lesson will focus on how we might approach our communication with an intention to understand the other person, especially when we don't meet eye to eye. When we disagree, we tend to judge the other party as something negative, perhaps wrong or annoying, and this judgment prevents us from exploring and understanding why the other party is doing what they're doing. We'll be exploring in this three-part lesson the importance of understanding the why and how this can be the first step to creating connections and cultivating compassion, especially when we don't meet eye to eye. So, I'd like you to bring into mind someone that you recently got into an argument with. It can be your roommate, or your parent, or your teacher. What happened? How did you feel? What were some of the thoughts you were having? How did it end up? So, incidents in which we don't meet eye to eye are unavoidable because we all have different backgrounds and we have different perspectives on many different issues. What I find time and time again is that even in one class that I teach, students have different perspectives from things like should homework be mandatory to things like abortion rights. So, as I mentioned before, these incidents breed judgments and divisions between people. Now, one of the ways in which we form relationships is through communication. What I want to share with you in this section of this lesson is about how to bring awareness in our communication so that we can build positive relationships. So, in a regular conversation setting, we usually have someone who is speaking and someone who is listening. Now, when is the last time when you really paid attention to when you're choosing to speak and when you're choosing to listen, especially in an argument? Oftentimes, we're trying to assert our own opinion and we tend to speak over the other person without even noticing it. When we notice that there is a power differential and the other person has more power over us, sometimes we get very quiet, but we don't really do this intentionally. Now, the second thing to bring our attention to is what's our intention to engage in this conversation? When we're not meeting eye to eye, perhaps you might think that your intention is to resolve an issue or to understand the other person. But when you're actually getting into the conversation, you might find yourself arguing, or you might be blaming, or you might be coercing the other person. And that means that your intention for engaging in this conversation is not matching your actual actions. And oftentimes, when that happens, it comes out as passive aggressive. So that's the second thing to bring our attention to. What's your intention in a conversation? Now, the third thing to pay attention to is what's going on within us in terms of emotions. Sometimes we raise our voice, shout at the other person, or say things that are hurtful, and we don't even know why that's happening. And that's often because we're experiencing anger within us. So, understanding what emotion you're experiencing is key to making sure that you're conversing in a way that builds relationships. Now, in order to bring our attention to when we speak and when we listen, or what our intention is, or what emotions we're experiencing, awareness in communication is very, very important. Now, we talked about awareness in the first unit when we talked about the space between what shows up and how we respond, and we can cultivate this awareness even in our conversation. Creating this space and this pause is key. So, when was the last time when you were getting in an argument that you actually intentionally slowed down, or you actually physically paused and you paid attention to when you were speaking or listening and checked in to reaffirm what your intention is for communicating with the other person? or actually physically paused and paid attention to what emotion you're experiencing in the moment. This is something that I want us to get into a practice of. So, in the next section of the clip, I want us to bring our attention especially to the second point of awareness, which is our intention for a conversation. And I want us to bring our attention to the importance of the intention to understand the other person, especially when we don't meet eye to eye. So at this point, if you wish to take a break, feel free to do so. Pause the video and get yourself a nice cup of tea or coffee and take some time to breathe. So, in the last clip, I asked you to bring into mind someone that you don't meet eye to eye with. Now, bring the same scenario into mind. If you're not thinking of this scenario, then think of this scenario. You're living with your housemates and you're in charge of cleaning the kitchen in your house. You can imagine your housemates to be maybe your family members or your peers, whichever applies to you better. Now, every time you enter the kitchen, you find dirty dishes piled up in the sink and you are sick of it. You choose to confront the situation and say to your housemates or your siblings, I noticed that you're keeping dirty dishes and pots in the sink after you eat. Could you please clean this up because I shouldn't have to clean up after you all the time. You leave such a mess. Then your housemate responds to you by saying, well, I'm too tired to clean up, and you are the one that's in charge of cleaning the kitchen, so cleaning up after any member cooks and eats is your responsibility. Now, here is a case where you are not meeting eye to eye with the other person. Now, what happens when these differences arise for different people in our community? Oftentimes, what happens is that we stop seeing the other person as a human who is worthy of our respect, and instead, we start seeing that person as an object, such as a table or a chair that stops us from getting what we want. And when we start seeing the other person as an object, we tend to engage in behaviors such as arguing with the other person or blaming the other person, coercing the other person to take your point of view, or defending your point of view profusely, or judging the other person, or ignoring what the other person has to say completely. Now, this is because we tend to see conflicts as win or lose situation where someone has to win and someone has to lose. And it's always you who has to win and the other person has to lose. Now, when we get into an argument like that, what is our intention? Well, to understand intention in communication, let's define intention a little bit more. Now, intention is about where we are coming from. It's about our motivation for communication. And it's about the vector that drives how and why we speak and listen. No matter what kind of a conversation you're having and however big the argument is between you and the other person, what I want to emphasize to you is that the single most powerful and transformative ingredients in a dialogue is the intention to understand the other person. Now, I'm going to say this one more time. The single most powerful and transformative ingredient in a dialogue is the intention to understand. Now, this is especially important if you're not meeting eye to eye. So, when you think of the last time you got into an argument, when was the last time that you said, tell me more about what you have to say? I really want to understand. Or let me see if I get it and try to paraphrase what the other person has said. Oftentimes, we don't do this, and instead, we get into the pattern of blaming and judging the other person, or protecting and defending our point of view, or perhaps coercing and manipulating the other person. And again, this is because we tend to see conflict as a win or lose situation. We get in a mindset that I have to win and that difference is a problem as something wrong. And when there is a difference and there is a problem, we tend to see the other person as an object that prevents us from getting what we need, instead of seeing that person as a human who is worthy of our respect. by engaging in these behaviors, especially in coercing and manipulating the other person, you might get your way. But what is at the cost? It's at the cost of gaining trust from the other person and building positive relationships with the other person. Now, if we were to change this perspective and start seeing conflict as a win win ground for learning about each other, or to start seeing differences as natural because we all come from different backgrounds, and start seeing inherent value in others, even though we don't see things eye to eye, and see others as humans who are worthy of respect, then we can actually approach this conversation or communication with curiosity and interest for what the other person has to say, or to collaborate and come up with solutions together, or to connect with the other person. Now, this is approaching conflict with the intention to understand the other person instead of trying to win and get the other person to lose. So it's very easy to say that we want to approach the conversation with the intention to understand. It's a lot easier said than done. So, in my next clip, I will share with you how this can be done in an effective way. So, if you wish to take a break at this point, feel free to do so. Pause the video and get yourself a cookie and take some time to stretch. So, in the last section of the clip, I talked about how we have a tendency to view conflicts as win or lose situations, and when we don't meet eye to eye, we tend to see our opponent as an object that gets in our way. Instead, I suggested that we can cultivate our intention to understand the other person, especially in times of conflict, so that we can build relationships. Now, this is a lot easier said than done. But one of the ideas that really helped me personally to approach a conversation with an intention to understand in times of conflict is this idea that everything we do to meet a need. Everything we do to meet a need. Now, these needs are things that all humans have in order to survive and thrive. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but what you see here on the slide is a pyramid that shows Maslow's hierarchy of needs. At the bottom are things like physiological needs we have or safety needs we have in order to survive as humans. And then we have things like love and belonging, esteem and self actualization needs that we have in order to thrive. So, just to give a few examples, we need to breathe in order to get oxygen, or we need food and water, and we need to reproduce. We need safety of our body, but at the same time, we need friendship, self esteem, and we wish to have creativity. Now, all these needs are universal, which means that they are shared across different religions and different cultures. They are root longings that we have as humans. They are positive, meaning that these are what we do want instead of what we don't want. And these are things that matter to us the most. Now, in times of conflict, what we tend to do is to mix up these needs with strategies, and we tend to focus a lot on strategies. Strategies are our attempts to meet our needs, the ideas we have about how to meet these needs, and strategies, however, are not always successful and may not be logical or conscious. So, strategies are about what we do, and needs are about why we do what we do. Now, if you wish to view a list of human needs, please check out the practice link. Now, when we look back at our example of you being in charge of cleaning the kitchen and there's a housemate who keeps leaving their dirty dishes, the strategy this person is applying is not cleaning dishes and instead going to sleep. Now, when we get into an argument, we tend to get stuck there. However, when we get curious about why this person is doing this, we might actually find out that this person has a more deeply embedded need, and this need is rest. Now, what's interesting about the relationship between needs and strategies is that there is not just one strategy that meets a need. Now, rest for this person can be cultivated through many different means. For example, this person can try to go to bed early the next day, or this person might choose to skip lunch and the class after to sleep. obviously, this doesn't just happen without consequence, but as you can see, there are many different strategies for how to meet a need. Oftentimes, our conversation is only at the level of strategies, and we don't really get curious to find out why this person is doing this. So, the more we view our own and others' actions in terms of needs, there are things we can achieve. One, we have more choices in our lives. Like I said in the previous slide, there are multiple strategies to meet a need. We also cultivate more empathy for others. If I'm a teacher and I have a student who was late or who didn't come to class at all, because that person chose to rest, of course I'll be upset. But rather than just finding that person didn't come, but to find out that person really needed rest, I'll relate to that because there are times when I have been tired and needed rest. So there's an empathy that I can develop with the other person. Also, there's more space to brainstorm creative solutions. So instead of the other person or my student not coming to class because he or she decided to rest, perhaps there are solutions for that person to get the rest, but also I will get my need met of learning, that my students show up and learn together. So we can come up with a solution for how to make both of these things happen, and that's a space for creativity. So the more we understand one another, the easier it is to find solutions that work for everyone. And the important thing is that we become curious about the needs behind their actions. So, in a conversation, it's important to establish as much mutual understanding as possible before moving on to problem solving. Oftentimes, we say, well, you didn't clean the dishes, so what can you do about that? But before we move on to the problem solving stage, let's understand the need behind their action. So, a few basic skills to remember. Remember the view that behind every action or statement that person says, there is something that matters. So be curious and find out what that person's need is. Second, listen for what matters, the deeper needs behind any action or statement. And this is something that is shared across all humans, so you can relate to that. Make sure that you connect with the other person to see if you've understood. Perhaps you can say something like, so, what you needed was rest, is that right? To check with the other person to make sure you guys are on the same page. So, to wrap up this lesson, as we move forward, it's important to keep in mind the following things. Well, first, difference is natural. We all come from different backgrounds, so we have different ideas and different opinions, and we can be curious. When difference arises, it's an opportunity for new learning and to come up with creative solutions for how we can move forward together. With this mindset, we can shift from our tendency to judge and treat any disagreement as a win lose battleground, but approach our differences with more openness and with an intention to understand the other party. Now, second, everything we do to meet a need. So, really take the time to find out what the person's need is behind the different actions that they take rather than just getting stuck in their strategies. This will help you to see aspects in your opponent that you can relate to, something that is shared across all humanity, and will help you empathize with the other person. Remember, strategies to meet the need can be illogical or may not satisfy everyone's needs, so this is where we can work together to come up with creative solutions. So, this week's practice will focus on identifying needs behind one's actions and statements. So, best wishes to you all.